Hello, everyone, and welcome to the WordPress Sydney Meetup. I'm Will Brown. I'm one of the organizers, and tonight we are going to be talking about domains and DNS. We've not done this topic for quite a while, and it's usually a biggie. So we've got Peter Schilling from the DMA is going to present tonight's talk. But first, if you are joining us on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube link. Click on the button below and ding that bell, and you'll get notifications when we come online. And if you're watching on Facebook, give us a big thumbs up. That would be fantastic. So a couple of things, the agenda for tonight. We're going to start. We started a little bit late. That's my fault. I kind of forgot we were here. So do a little bit of a welcome. There's no news and updates just now. There's not really been much happening in the WordPress world this month. And then we'll just flip on to the main presentation. But we do ask if you've got any comments, if you can leave them in the discussion below, in the comments below, and use a hashtag ask at the very beginning. That just makes it really easy for us to be able to figure out what the questions are, and we can put them up on the screen. And if you want to share anything on the socials, then use the hashtag WPSID to share those, and I'll keep an eye on that channel. And as always, we've got code of conduct as well. So you can see the code of conduct. It's on wpaustralia.org/code of conduct. I'm not going to read it out. I'm just going to basically let you guys have a read of that. And it's basically just be nice to everyone. And that will basically cover the entire 20-page of the code of conduct. So let us know who you are and where you're joining from today. So we've got some people in already. We've got Jonathan, who is looking forward to this one. It's a good topic, domains and DNS. I love it. We've got Morris as well, saying hi to everyone, and Paul as well. We've got our Sydney crew and joining us for this evening. So just quickly, I want to cover some sponsors as well. So even though we're not doing physical meetups, we do have our sponsors who are helping us. So we've got Kinetics, we've got WP Engine, we've got Plesk, we've got WordPress Community Support, and Microsoft as well. And what I'll do is I will put some of the links in the description below if you want to click through to those brands and just give them some love, because they do support us and support the community as well, even though we're not at the physical meetups just yet. Alex says hi from Silicon Valley, California. Thanks for tuning in, Alex. Glad to have you with us. So we are in lockdown in Sydney at the moment, which is a big thumbs down. 100 or so cases. So this is what day 2 of lockdown, I think it is. So yeah, not enjoying that, but it is what it is. So hopefully wherever you guys are, you'll be able to get out and about freely. Just some other stuff here. I am looking for other people to help step up and organize the WordPress meetup. So there's not a lot to do really, because we've got the online meetups at the moment. So 2 to 3 hours per month, just to help with things like social posting, comment moderation, curate some questions as well. So for these meetups, they last for maybe about an hour and a half, and then there's maybe about an hour's worth of stuff to do during the week. You can forget the in-person meetups, that's way out just now. But if you are interested, I'm going to copy a link and put it in the comments down below. You can fill out that form if you're interested in helping out organizing, and I'll get back to you on that one. Okay, so we have Peter up next, and he's going to talk about the main topic, which is domains and DNS for that one. I'm just going to share his screen with you just now, and I'm going to let Peter introduce himself. He's well known to the WordPress community, but I'll let him do his own introduction, and I'll bail out for a little bit. And just let Peter know, Peter, if you keep an eye on the StreamYard link as well, and I'll pop up some questions like this, and then you'll be able to see the question there, and you'll answer that. So, and just keep an eye on the StreamYard link. But I will hand you over to Peter Schilling from the DMA. Take it away.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Paul. So it's going to, so is that coming up? It's screen share. Yep, let's just assume that it is. Okay, so the topic for this evening, we're going to be talking about domain names and DNS, which is kind of, for a WordPress meetup, it's a little bit away from WordPress, but I've presented this a couple of times. It's probably a little while ago now in person when we used to do in-person meetups, and lots of people were interested in it. So Will's invited me back to do this again so that we can cover it off again. And certainly if there's questions and things like that, we can answer those as we go through as well. So I've kind of got it's a bit of a crash course. I've broken this into two sections. So in the first section, we're going to focus on domain names and just give you a bit of an introduction as to how the domain name industry is actually set up. So there's a bit of a hierarchy to it, and for the most part, it's generally day to day. You don't really sort of need to know too much about this and to interact and register and manage a domain name. But it's always good knowledge to understand how the actual regulation side of it is set up and how that all works. So that's episode 1, and then of course episode 2 we're going to jump into DNS and talk a little bit about DNS. So we'll cover some basics of that, and then we'll get into a couple of sort of practical things of which would be useful for WordPress website owners, of how to do delegations and things like that if you're changing the hosting that you might have for your website. So let's just get into the domain name side of things, and we'll just take a few minutes to kind of get an understanding of this. So I used to, when I did this presentation in person, one of the challenges was to count all the acronyms as we go through the presentation. If you want to do that on your fingers on your way through, yes, you probably won't have enough fingers, but see how you go. So the first one is GTLD. So domain names, like a lot of other parts of tech, have a lot of acronyms, and the first one is GTLD, which stands for Generic Top Level Domain. So these domain names, some of the oldest that have been around, com, net, and org, and they're called top-level domain names. So they, you would have certainly seen lots of brands, like Coke.com, Apple.com, using domain names like this. And as I said, they're certainly some of the oldest domain names that have been part of the DNS system now for many, many years. Slightly newer is some other top-level domains, like biz and info. They were brought in probably 20 years ago now. Seems crazy to think like that. They were considered new at the time. So these top level domains are registered into the millions. So .com, for example, there's quite literally millions of domains registered in that particular namespace. And so talking about the regulation side of things, there's an organization called ICANN, which is the organization that's responsible for managing some of the regulation side of things, and they particularly focus on the top level domain names, so the .com, .net, .org domain names, and there's lots more, and we'll get to that. Generally, what happens then is that ICANN has given responsibility for the next set of domain names to different organizations around the globe, and it's generally organized by country. So a second set of domain names is what we call CCTLDs, and these are country code top-level domains. So if you're in Australia, you'd be familiar with things like .com.au, New Zealand.co.nz, .co.uk for the United Kingdom. So there's a second group, so GTLDs, and then we have the second group of domain names that are CCTLDs, country code top-level domains, and they are, generally speaking, they are representing a country like Australia, New Zealand, UK, ES is Spain, for example. So what happens is that, so we have ICANN, which is our kind of top-level regulator, and then most of these countries then have an organization inside the country that's been delegated authority to be able to set up the policy, so who can and can't register domain names and resolve disputes inside each country. So in Australia, we have an organisation called AUDA, so AUDA, and that's the Australian Domain Name Administrator. And you can find their website at auda.org.au. So why you'd want to know that is they're the people that you would go to if you have disputes around domain names. So they would look after situations like, so if you've got trademark disputes, if you forget to renew your domain name and someone else registers it, all those kinds of problems, you go to the Australian Domain Name Administrator to be able to solve those kind of problems. And they're also the organisation that set the policy. So they, in Australia, for example, if you've registered a .au domain name, you would know that you would have to have an ABN number to register one of those domain names. So our is responsible for setting that policy and saying who can and can't register the domain names and what you can do with them and the like. So that's how it is structured in Australia. In New Zealand, there's an organisation called Internet NZ, and they do the same kind of thing in New Zealand. And so each country, generally speaking, would have an organisation that's been given the authority to manage their CCTLD, and they've been given that authority by ICANN, and that's the way that the regulation side of things work. So, getting into something that's a bit more sort of new, there's a section of domain names called new GTLDs, and we call them new GTLDs, even though they've been around now for probably a number of years. So some of them are sort of 5 and 6 years old now. So in that first slide, a couple of slides back, we had domain names like .com, .net, and edu and mil. So some of those domain names have been around, as I said, for 25, 30 years or more. The new GTLDs are things, domains that have been created in the last kind of half a dozen years or so. And this has been slowly unfolding to try to increase the amount of names. So lots of driving factors behind this, but sort of one of the kind of fundamentals was that we were running out of namespace. So in .com, for example, you were in a situation where you're quite literally running out of strings that you could register. So the new GTLDs aims to solve that by giving additional suffixes, so additional top-level domains. And so it gives more choice to people. So to give you an example, so my domain name shilling.au is an Australian domain name, so it ends in .au, it's a country code. But coming along now, if I want to register a domain name, I could have a lot more choice. So I could quite literally get peter.guru or peter.blog, peter.sydney, and lots of other examples. So all these domain names are available now to register, so you can actually use them, and you could use those domain names to run your WordPress site or any other kind of website directly on them. So just trying to exemplify that, just gives users a lot more choice of what they can register instead of having to get sort of very long strings of domains. So the new GTLDs, we find that they're broken into a couple of different categories, and you'll see how big this is as I go through this. So the first category of the new GTLDs is cities and regions. So lots of cities, not just cities, sometimes they're areas of countries, have gone ahead and organised a new GTLD to represent a particular area. So for example, now we have .Sydney and we have .Melbourne, we have .NYC for New York City, .Berlin, .Africa. So these are all examples of live domain names that you can find on the internet now, and you can actually register the second level underneath those. So as you can see there, the cities and regions tend to be all sort of geographic based. That's our first kind of category of new GTLDs. So you see domain names like this, where you might get seafood.sydney or lawnmowing.melbourne or a restaurant.nyc or a cycle shop in Berlin, for example. So you'll start to see, if you haven't already, if you go looking for these a little bit more, you'll start to see quite creative uses of these, and they start to pop up with people's websites in this new format. So the next kind of section that we can have a look at is what we call generic. So cities and regions, and then our generic domains tend to be things like this: .website, audio, .christmas, .flowers, .guitars, etc., etc. And once again, now this is just a quick sort of set of examples, but all of these domain names are now available, and there's tons more. So if you were a guitar shop, for example, you might have Pete's Pete's, Sydney.guitars kind of thing. You could have a domain name like that. So it allows you to be a lot more descriptive. So that's our generic ones. And then the third group of new GTLDs is what we call IDNs, or international domain names. So up until now, there's very little sort of representation for people that were not using the Western Latin character sets. So now we can find GTLDs that are written in other scripts. So we've got a lot of sort of Middle Eastern and Asian scripts that are not the traditional A to Z, 0 to 9. And so that's the third group of international domain names, or new GTLDs. So that kind of gives you a bit of a flavour as to the length and breadth of the new GTLDs and what they're setting out to do. So one final group, which I'll just cover off quickly, and these are called closed domains. So there are some large organisations that have gone out and they've registered their brand names: .google, .youtube, .apple, BMW, etc., etc. So you'll see then that you'll end up with addresses like this. So domains.google and home.barclays. So that's the bank. So if you go to those websites, it's having some trouble controlling these slides here. You'll see that those calls that I've got here on the right hand side, domains.google, are actually live domains. So there are some like Apple and YouTube that I don't believe that they've done anything with them. So those GTLDs have been registered and put into DNS, but the companies that own them have not actually done anything with them. Australia Post, I do believe, have done something. I haven't checked on that lately though. So the .auspost, that might be something to do. If you just chuck www.auspost into a browser, you can see. I just have a fleeting memory that they did something with that, but I can't remember exactly what it was. So there you go. So they're closed domains. So that's our fourth kind of shoulder group after the three main, the generic, the cities and regions, and the IDNs, international domains. So to give you a bit of a feel for how big this is, this gives you so by registration numbers, the top 10 new GTLDs. So I grabbed this off. So I grabbed these statistics from a website called ntldStats.com. And this was just from today. So it shows you. So there's 3 million domains being registered underneath .xyz, 2.1 million domains in .online. Okay. So they're the top 10 domains by registration. So there's actually quite a lot of them. The funny thing is that if you browse around the internet and look at brands, you don't tend to see a lot of these GTLDs cropping up, but you do see more and more of them if you keep your eyes peeled for them. So there is in fact 1,500 odd new GTLDs that have been delegated into the domain name system. So there's quite a lot of them out there, even if you don't necessarily kind of see them all the time. So there's a couple of examples here. I've got one. Festival in Melbourne called the Taste of Melbourne, which they've used tasteof.melbourne to get their domain name, and live.melbourne is another domain name that you'll see that's actually out there and being used as well. So while the pickup of these is kind of a little bit slower than you'll see in .com and .com.au, there actually are starting to happen. So certainly in Sydney, I've seen a few more of them underneath .sydney. So you see those domains actually get registered and being used. So can you get one? Yes, you can. So not all registrars. So a registrar is the organisation that you would generally go to get a domain name. So if you're in Australia, you might be familiar with Melbourne IT or Net Registry, Crazy Domains. So they're all examples of Australian registrars. Some of them do support new GTLDs. Not all of them have all of the new GTLDs. So you've got to kind of shop around a little bit to see the full kind of full cross section of domains to be able to see all of them. So there's a site one I tend to recommend to people is a company called Hover. They're owned by Two Cows, which is a Canadian company, and they've been around in the domain name space now for a long time, 20 years or so, probably longer than that. And so they're a good example. They're certainly not the only one, but they're a good example that have like a lot of these new GTLDs. So you can go onto their website and you'll type in a string like, lawn mowing or something like that, and they will show you lawn mowing dot everything. So you'll find that there's a good selection there. So Hover's a good place to go. Net Registry. So that Hover is a North American, Canadian organization, so they'll charge you in US dollars. Net Registry do have some of the new GTLDs. So if you're Australian and you want to deal with an Australian registrar, you can deal with those guys. They don't have them all, but they have a good selection of them. So that's kind of the end of episode 1. Let me just jump out of here for a second. I've got Will reminding me that I need to look at the comments and questions. Which I can see. So we'll be back in a moment to help you with some of the questions. So if you've got questions, certainly throw it into the comment box, and we can loop back to these and ask those as we're going through. So what we might do is let's keep going. We'll jump into the second part of this. So the second section of what we're going to talk about tonight is the DNS side of it. So we've just had that quick kind of introduction to domain names and the way that they're structured, and certainly the exciting thing there is the new GTLDs to get access to some of those newer domain names. The second part of what we're going to talk about is just a quick introduction to DNS, and we'll kind of explain it super quickly. It will be pretty quick. But then I want to talk about some practical uses of that. So as I said at the start of this, when you're changing your web hosting from one organization to another, how that's done. So let's start by talking about IP addresses. So you might have seen numbers like this. So each machine, certainly in a web hosting environment on the internet, is assigned an IP address like this. And these are version 4 IP addresses. There's now IPv6, which is a slightly different version of IP addressing. But generally, you'll see this more than anything else as far as, in the context of what we're talking about of changing your hosting and the like. So the way that it works in DNS, to kind of, quickly whiz over this for you, is that we have a host name, so www.xyz.com, and that gets assigned to an IP address. And the reason we do this is for humans. So humans are not very good at reading and remembering dotted quads, so 2.123.4, blah, blah, blah. What we want to do is we want to be able to remember website addresses, so xyz.com or abc.net.au or cnn.com. So the humans want to use English or different language versions of words. So what the computers need to do, though, is we need to be able to translate those English words and other language words into IP addresses, and that's basically what DNS is doing. So we've got a few components of DNS that I want to kind of get an understanding of for you. So we've basically got your computer or your smartphone. You'll be connected to an ISP. So the second thing that we want to know about is your ISP, is what we call the recursive name server. So your phone or your computer by itself is pretty isolated until it can talk to the recursive name server that is available through your internet service provider. So if that might be Telstra or one of the NBN providers in Australia, it'll be that recursive name servers that really is the first part of for resolving DNS for you. So we then have what we call root name servers, and the last part of our DNS bits is what we call authoritative name servers, and they're the ones that you would be familiar with dealing with when you're changing your hosting, for example. So let's just get through some of these and try and get a bit of an understanding of what these are all about. So going back to ICANN that we talked about before, as well as regulating domain names, they also help regulate the DNS side of things. So what we have is a bunch of what we call root servers that are the servers that control which DNS servers around the internet are responsible for different types of domain names. So .com, .net, .org, all of those will be available inside our root server network. And then, so the second set of servers that we're interested in is what we call authoritative name servers. So these will be name servers at your hosting company. So if you're dealing with Telstra, or you're dealing with Crazy Domains or NetRegistry or any of these kind of hosting companies, then they would have a set of authoritative name servers, and that would be the name servers that you're using to host the DNS when you're hosting your website with those particular organizations. So I've got my crazy drawings here that I've done up for this. So basically what happens is this. So we've got your computer there. You're looking for abc.net.au. So that request comes out of your phone or your computer, and it goes to your ISP, and it is then looked up by what's called a recursive name server. And that recursive name server then does the job of finding out which computer on the internet it needs to connect you to be able to look at the ABC website, abc.net.au. So first of all, we go to the root DNS, and you'll get an answer back from the root DNS servers. And basically the question that's been asked there is, where do I go for all things .au? So the country code .au. So you'll get it back. So the recursive name server gets back a response saying, okay, well, the .au, you need to go over to these servers. Now, AUDA, as I said to you, is the organisation that regulates the Australian Australian domain names.au. They will have a set of name servers that will have the next answer, which is, okay, so I found you guys are the responsible name servers for .au. I'm looking for abc.net.au. Where would I find that information? And so you'll get another response back saying, if you want to go to abc.net.au, you need to go to 203.2.218.2007. And it sends the answer back up. So you can see the little blue arrow going back up to the recursive name server. So all that happens there's a couple of exceptions to this, but all of that happens every time, or a lot of the time, when you are typing in a website into your phone or to your computer to be able to go to a particular website. So it goes through that process. Now, what happens at the recursive name server is that it will remember that answer. So the question was, which IP address do I need to connect to in order to get to abc.net.au? It will remember the answer is 203.2. whatever. So if someone from the same ISP wants to also go to the ABC website, 10 minutes later, the recursive name server will not do that whole rigmarole again. It'll catch that, and it will say, okay, well, I know the answer to that question. So it will give out back to your computer the same answer, 203.2.218. And so that's what we're calling caching in a recursive name server kind of environment, and it will remember those addresses for a certain amount of time, which is a good thing. So it speeds up the whole process. So getting on to how this practically works. So when you're delegating your website, so when you want to move, say you're at company X and you're trying to move your website to company Y, what you're generally doing is that you're going to delegate your domain name. And so going back to this slide just quickly, down here, that's my mouse. I hope that's showing up. Where you've got the name server ns.abc.net.au, you'll be changing that authoritative name server is what you're doing when you're delegating your domain name. So you would go to your registrar, so NetRegistry or Hover or whoever the registrar is, and you would enter the new authoritative name servers for your domain name, and it's then their responsibility to update the zone for your TLD. So whether it's a .au domain name or a .com, one of the new GTLDs that we spoke of, then it would it's the registrar's responsibility to update the zone file so that your TLD your domain rather is delegated to a different authoritative name service. And so your authoritative name server would then hold what we call resource records. Okay, so if you're in a login for your registrar, so whomever that might be, you generally would see a screen that looks something like this. So they're asking you the question, okay, what are the authoritative name servers that you want to assign your domain name to? So in this example, we've got dns1.stabletransit.com and DNS2. So your hosting company would tell you what these name servers are, and this is what it would look like. So you'd go in there and you'd enter the new DNS details, and as soon as you click save on that kind of screen, the registrar would actually push that. So it happens straight away. Push that into the zone for your TLD. So next up, then, so that's one part of the puzzle. The second part of the puzzle is that in this example, DNS1.stabletransit is the authoritative name server. So you would then get from the hosting company an interface that looks like this, where you can actually set the IP address for the web machine, so the web server in this case, that's going to host your website. So you'd put in the IP address there, and we've got here a field which is pretty interesting, the TTL. So the TTL, so going back to that section we were talking about, the recursive name server remembering or caching a copy of those zone files, the TTL basically tells the recursive name server for how many seconds can I remember that. So generally, this might be set for something between, sometimes you'll see it as set for an hour, so 3,600 seconds. You might see it set up for sometimes days or weeks. And so it depends on the situation. You'll find different people will have different views on this. Generally, if you've got a domain that is not moving anytime soon, you could set it up so that it could cache for a day or so, and there wouldn't be any problems at all. So that's kind of a quick walkthrough of how that all works. So next up, I guess in this section of the presentation, just wanted to try and give you some tips. So if people attending managing their domain name, they might have one or two domain names for their personal site, maybe, or for their for their business or whatnot. These are just some quick tips for you as to things to kind of be aware of. The first thing is to understand who it is that you're using for the various pieces of this puzzle. So I would encourage people to know who their registrar is. So, who did I register my domain name with? And then we've talked about the fact that when you go to a hosting company, then that's where your DNS would maybe be held. So know who that is. And the reason why this is, so I work in a WordPress agency. We deal with lots of people's websites and domain names, and the first thing, someone phones us and says, there's a problem with my website, it's not showing up. The very first thing I look at is not on the web server or anything to do with WordPress. It's what's happening with their domain name, because 9 times out of 10, someone has not renewed the domain name, or someone has changed the DNS, while they're setting up a mail server or something that's, possibly quite unrelated to the website. And that's what's causing the problem that the person might be calling about. So understanding who those things are. So when you do have your moment of need, you understand where, who the different people are that you're depending on. And that's quite a common one that people don't always know. So next tip is to, when you do know who your registrar is, so the company that's registered your domain names, you'll find that the registrars will generally only contact you via email to tell you that your domain is expiring and that you need to renew it. And I've seen people fall foul of this one time and again, where I might be working somewhere and have an email address of peter@xyz.com. When I move on and I don't work there anymore, the renewal notices are coming to my email address that possibly doesn't exist. So I always encourage people to set up a generic kind of email address like domains@mycompany.com.au, or it could be, doesn't have to be domains, it could just be administration team or something like that. But as people come and go from an organization, you hand that on to the next person, so that the registrar notifications of renewal will always go to hopefully to an email box of someone where they're paying attention to it. So that's a good tip too. Just some ideas on registering domains. I think there's lots of people who like to make it really complicated and get really long domain names. I think, generally speaking, a shorter domain name is better. When people ask me, I try and discourage them from using fancy spellings, because it's very difficult when you try to give someone an email address over the telephone, and the classic example is Telstra. A few years back, they had a domain name that was create, and it was CRE and then the number 8.com.au, or something like that. And it's a very difficult thing. So when you're on the phone trying to say, my email address is peter@create.com.au, generally what people are going to do is write down, the create.com.au. So generally, I like give people the advice to be clear of fancy spellings like that, because it can confuse when you're trying to communicate. Consider the SEO benefits of a domain name. Google, as we know, don't actually tell us too much about what's in their algorithm, but certainly it's been demonstrated that Google pays attention to the fact that .au is an Australian domain name, or a .nz is a New Zealand domain name. It's unknown as to how much detail Google pays attention to, but certainly if you look at some simple searches, I don't know this for certain, but I'll just use this as an example. If you look at lawn mowing .sydney, as long as their website is in good structure and lots of other parts of their SEO is going well, you'll find that if someone did a search for lawn mowing services in Sydney, that there's a potential benefit from SEO out of having the keywords that people are searching for in the actual domain name itself. So that's something to consider as well. If it is something that can be summed up in one or two words, and certainly the city and region-based domain names lend themselves to that quite a lot. So you can imagine a restaurant, if it was a nicely branded restaurant that was XYZ.Sydney, it tells you a lot about the fact that it's a restaurant and that it's in Sydney, and it can help you certainly from an SEO perspective as well. So that's some thoughts. So I think that's probably kind of getting towards the end of what I was going to cover off with that. I'm just wondering if Will is paying attention. Let me just see. Yes, he is paying attention. Hello, Will.
I'll just unmute myself. That'll help.
Just unmute yourself. I find it hard to look at both screens at once. Was there questions coming through at all, or questions that popped up?
We've not had any questions so far. So guys, if you want to ask Peter anything about domains or DNS, now would be the best time to do that. Just ask him a few questions in the chat down below. But I have one for you. Let's see if I can get the speaker working properly, because I can hardly hear you. There we go. Is that better? Yes, I can hear you there. Okay, here's one for you. What about using emojis for domain names?
Yes, so good question. I don't know absolutely the answer to that, but I have seen that people have managed to do it in some of the new GTLDs. I can't remember the example that I did see this a couple of weeks back. So when I was talking about the fact that all these new GTLDs are set up, each one of those, so dot Sydney, for example, there's an organisation. So it's the Sydney City Council, or the Sydney. I'm not sure if it's New South Wales government. I think it's the Sydney City Council that is the registrant, so the person who manages .Sydney as a top level domain. They set the policy for what can and can't be registered. So of the new GTLDs, I had a slide saying there's 1,500 or so top level domains. Each one of those is managed by an organisation. Sometimes there's organisations that manage lots of them, but and it's up to that individual organisation to set the policy. Some of them have said that yes, you can register emojis inside the domain name, which I think it would be interesting if you were on just for that. I had a slide saying keep it simple and don't use creative spellings. Using an emoji would be interesting. The example, I wish I could remember what there was now, but as I'm talking about this, it was someone who had managed to register, let's just say for argument's sake, it was a smiley face or something like a smiley face dot something or other. I have to dig that up and see if I can remember what that was.
Okay.
It's one of those things that you read on Reddit somewhere, in a DNS forum or something on Reddit, and I've only got half of it stuck to my memory.
I did watch a presentation by somebody, this was many years ago, and what they did was they completely changed their Mac OS interface with only emojis. So like their username was an emoji, the password was an emoji. They changed all the system fonts to emojis, and then they went to see what they could try and do, and it was just utter chaos. Everything was just smiley faces and everything. So I can imagine that would be very, very similar happen with domains.
Well, if someone said to you, for argument's sake, that send me an email address at peter@smileyface.com, how many people don't know how to get a smiley face on their keyboard? Like for the emoji, because it's not just the colon open bracket. You've got to actually know the key press to get into a smiley face. But anyway, there's a question from Jonathan.
There is. I'll put it up on screen. There we go.
So Jonathan asking, what is a zone in respect to domains? I'll whiz back through. Just come here, Yoda, and I'll go back to here. So this slide here is part of a zone. So what a zone is, so at your authoritative DNS, so if you're hosting your domain name with a hosting company, let's just call them XYZ hosting company, they'll say, we need you to configure these particular IP resource records inside the zone. So each domain name, so this example is our domain name, thedma.com.au. The domain thedma.com.au has what we call a zone that defines all of the different resources inside there. So one is just, so the one you can see on the screen is just for the domain name itself. So when I type in thedma.com.au, in the zone it says that resolves to 198.101.128.46. So other things that are in the zone would be your mail records. So you'd have a what we call an MX, so a mail exchange record, which would be telling everyone on the internet which machine to deliver mail to when you want to send mail to someone at thedma.com.au. So a zone is the collective kind of all those resource records. So they can be A records, MX records, CNAMEs and the like. They will be, there's no kind of standard format. Generally, it'll be something like www equals this IP, mail equals this IP, etc., etc. I hope that helps you, Jonathan.
I have another question for you, Peter. So now that DNS names, well, for quite a while, they've been able to include non-English characters in the DNS name, and yes, that's to support like foreign language sets. How does that impact DNS spoofing? Can you maybe talk about what DNS spoofing is and how that could come about?
Yes. So you asked, that's a very poignant question. Have you had a problem lately?
No, it's just something that came, like something I was reading about a few weeks ago.
So there's lots of areas in DNS. So spoofing is when you're pretending to be a machine that you're not, for example. So this has happened. I'll give you an example that's happened just recently with Vodafone. So Vodafone is a mobile carrier in Australia and an NBN carrier, and so they've got what we call a recursive name server. So everyone who's on Vodafone that connects to their network uses a set of recursive name servers to get the answers to DNS resolution. So if you want to go to abc.net.au or xyz.com, google.com, their recursive name server is responsible for giving you the answer. So hackers will sometimes target a machine like a recursive name server, because what they're able to do, if they concede another IP address for CNN.com that isn't the actual IP address for CNN.com, that means that everybody that is using that internet service provider at a given time would type in CNN.com and they would be sent to a different machine altogether on the internet. So there are attacks like that. That could also happen in an IDN environment, an international domain name. But do you have another example specifically of an IDN being hijacked like that?
Not hijacked, but certainly people with Let's Encrypt now offering free SSL certificates for quite a number of years. Anyone can register a website and make it secure. So I've seen quite a few, or read quite a few articles where people have been registering domain names and they're using foreign characters that look kind of like our A's or our I's or our L's, but they're not. Yep. So for example, Google, but the L in Google will be like a foreign character that kind of looks like an L, but it isn't. And of course, because people can register these domain names, it doesn't cost anything for SSL. You can set up that foreign domain name and give it an SSL, so it kind of looks kind of proper, Whereas
that practice has been happening for as long as there's domain names, but because what would happen is people would register GOOGL.com to give the E off, for example, or Google with 3 O's, so GOOGLE.com. So that's something. So mistypings or typos of domain names is something that's been happening for many, many years. International domain names just gives people a new slant on doing the same thing, for sure. I hadn't heard of that one particularly, but now that you say it, I can well imagine that's what people would get up to. And certainly when you, a lot of the phishing attacks, and I'm seeing some pretty sophisticated phishing attacks these days, and they take you to a website. I saw one, it's getting off track a little bit of domain name, but it was of MailChimp. And if you know anything about MailChimp, the email servers, I can't remember the exact format, but it's something like, it'll be ex1.mailchimp.com. And what these guys had done is registered the domain name ex1mailchimp.com without that dot in between the second and third level. And of course, the website looked brilliant. And even to me, because I sort of looked at it and someone in the office here showed it to me and I was like, oh, that looks okay. And then I was like, hang on a minute, no, it doesn't look okay. Because all that was different was a dot between the host name. So it's not, I think it's ES, but it might be MX, whatever it is. But they'd registered the domain name and missing the dot between the second and third level. So it's a pretty smart way of even trying to get past someone who knows what they're looking for, to get something like that through.
Yeah. And also, no, that's a good example. Just you covered, setting up an email to catch all the domain renewals and stuff as well. I think that's so important, because I remember back in 2015, Google forgot to renew google.com. And it came up for auction for $12. So somebody actually purchased google.com for $12 very, very briefly for like an hour before somebody realized. And then, it was transferred back to Google. But that was because, of an admin slip, because the email didn't go through. Because people weren't on top of it, So, and I think that happened quite recently as well to another top company. They forgot to renew.
It happens to people, organizations, big and small, all the time.
Yeah. So definitely one to watch out, guys. If you are got your domains there, just make sure you got like an email that you've always got access to. Because if you lose that that domain name, it's really difficult to get it back. Yeah, big brands like Google is one thing, but if you've got your name or just like a generic website name, it could be quite difficult to try and prove that is actually yours to get it back with. Any other questions? Post them in the comments. I can't see anything else coming through at the moment, so we might just wrap it up for today. So I want to say thank you very much, Peter, for giving that fantastic presentation on domains and DNS. So everyone give Peter a big round of applause. I know you can't hear it, but
Definitely.
Thank you. Anyway, so just a couple of slides here. So we also I also organize the Elementor meetup, and we have that on the first Thursday of every month. So the next one that coming up is the July the 1st. And I'm actually going to be talking about the Google Core Web Vitals again. So this is like a rerun of the one that I did last month for the WordPress meetup. But a little bit more focus on Elementor and how you can get your Core Web Vitals up on that. And next month, I don't have a graphic yet, but next month for the WordPress meetup, Sydney, I'm going to be talking about essential things to do after you launch a website. So I think at the beginning of the year, I talked about things to do before you launch your website. So this is a website is launched. Here's a checklist of things that you really should be doing after you've launched that. Okay, guys, so thank you very much. Everyone's saying thank you. So got some thank you from Jonathan, from Alex, from David, from Jonathan again, clap, 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 and from Claire as well. Great talk, fantastic. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you have a fantastic COVID-free evening. Thanks again to Peter, and I will see you guys next month for that Essentials post-launch checklist. Okay, see you guys. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Will. Thanks for having me.